Well, if you're hearing this, then what I said in my 2021 teaser video remains true, that this is, in fact, my first serious NEP video of 2021. So, yeah, today we're going to be going through and looking for, I mean, you've already seen it in the title, no use trying to make like an epic reveal or whatever. Yeah, we're going to be going through the Neptunia anime and finding every single war crime that occurs, every single act that is in violation of the Geneva Conventions and Protocols. And every character that has committed at least one war crime, we're going to determine a full sentence. So let's get right into this. We're going to be skipping, actually, episode 1, because there are no war crimes. There is literally nothing against the killing of wildlife. So, and that's all that really happens in episode 1, aside from the signing of a treaty, which is obviously not a war crime in any sense. So, in episode 2, Trick and Linda kidnap Ram and Ram and hold them as hostages, which in itself is a war crime, but also commit what we can probably consider rape. Linda's taken out at the end of the episode by Noir, seemingly without cause. However, not only was, as we saw her, she actually responsible for the kidnapping, but she didn't openly surrender, instead trying to trick Noir that she was uninvolved. Obviously not an act of surrender, and thus Noir is justified in a fighting back. Episode 3 is largely uneventful, though when the action does kick up at the end, and the 4 goddesses are captured by our 4, Pirachu takes pictures of them tied up, and as we see later, sends them out to the entire world. Due to how they're tied up, can be considered another act of sexual abuse to a prisoner of war. Episode 4, we start off pretty strong with our 4 denying the 4 goddesses, now prisoners of war, the right to a fair trial, and sentencing them to death. We then move back to the candidate's perspective, in which they proceed to attack a civilian for fun. However, that civilian had just committed a rather significant crime by intruding on them, so it could probably be exempted, especially because no long-term damage was done to her. Also because fuck Agnes. Finally, while it could be considered child soldiers that the candidates are fighting to rescue the CPUs, not only did they make the choice on their own, but IF and Compa, despite being with them, did not influence the choice in any way. They simply helped out once they had made their decision, so nobody's really taking the fall for it. Episode 5 only contains one war crime, and as you're probably expecting, yeah, torture of a prisoner of war, specifically by drowning. Enough said. Episode 6 is about, the whole hacking incident, and that's just cyber warfare. Nothing really off about that. While the hacking was used to advance, a different goal, as we found out later, the pictures were, of an enemy in private, doing private stuff, so there hasn't really been, an account of that, especially since they were used as, blackmail and stuff. So it could be. I'm not really sure, though. I think I'm gonna let it pass as nothing, which would mean that episode 6 doesn't have any war crimes at all. But episode 7 is not exempt from war crimes. Our 4 spying was okay. In fact, quite impressive that she was able to climb all the way up there. It's holy shit. But, yeah, let's see. First actual one, chemical weapons. Yes, it only put IF and Compa to sleep. However, that is considered a harmful gas being used. And even if we could let this one slide, well, it's followed directly by, torture. But in this episode, we have the first absolutely, 100%, yeah, definitely a war crime on the protagonist's side, and that is, yeah, pretty, that's a little bit excessive, what she did to her for there. So, yeah, Neptune and Nepgear were fine, though. Obviously, IF and Compa did nothing wrong. Episode 8, Linda poisons Neptune. That's one in itself. And that's responded to by Irisart. torture. Possibly sexual. And now we end the episode off with 2 war crimes committed basically at the same time, being both kidnapping and brainwashing of a civilian. Even worse, as that civilian is a minor. Episode 9 has nothing all the way up to the very end, in which it continues along with the trend of Pishi being the victim of war crimes, being both experimentation on a civilian and child soldiers. Episode 10 starts with the mass brainwashing of civilians, and Linda gets threatened by Irisheart with sexual abuse as a way of interrogation. And meanwhile, throughout the entire episode, Pishi has been using excessive violence against Neptune, who is unarmed. Episode 11, we're getting near the end. Blanc fakes a peaceful meeting in order to attack Neptune. The episode goes on for a little bit longer, and then the beginning of Ray's long streak of war crimes begins. First, with an act of terrorism in revealing her superweapon, completely annihilating a decent portion of the Planeptune city. Then, a needless demonstration of power and another act of terrorism by destroying the Planeptune tower in one shot, I mean a decent portion of it, as well as some more city around it. Well, okay, after the episode cutting off in the beginning of episode 12, we have Ray firing on civilians, draining share energy. Obviously, we can't exactly confirm if that's like an actual war crime, but most likely in really any of the Neptunia worlds, it probably is, so I'm gonna count that under the same category of, say, like chemical weapons. And then Ray's war crime spree comes to a close with suicide bombing, which is okay on its own, but only if it's intended to slow the enemy down. This was intended to cause as much destruction as possible, and thus is terrorism, essentially. Episode 12 ends with Neptune dissolving the treaty, and the other goddesses agree, which there was nothing illegal happening there. So, yeah, that's the end. Well, actually, I have a little more to say. The first OVA does not actually have any war crimes. I mean, there was, like, a scene that we saw of, like, rape and torture, but that was a dream, so it didn't actually happen. And, I mean, yeah, then it's just, like, fighting monsters in that tower thing. So, that's it for the first OVA. The second one doesn't have any either. I mean, come on, it's a fucking camping trip. I guess there were a few monsters near the end, but, I mean, I know it's not actually outlawed, but I consider it a fucking war crime that the 2 Neptunes didn't get to meet. But before I get too off track, let's count up every single character's war crimes. So, how I'm going to do this is going from the character with the least amount of war crimes to the character with the most. So, I guess in the 1 war crime category, we're going to start off with Pishi using excessive violence against Neptune when she was not armed. This can basically just be excused because she was brainwashed, so, you know, the victim of another war crime. So, yeah, Pishi's innocent. Moving on, next we have Pirachu, which he committed his single war crime under no influence of, like, brainwashing or something. He did it on his own volition. However, he was under the orders of our floor. So, while he did do it by his own will, he wasn't the one that, you know, came up with the idea. Next up, we have Linda. So, pretty simple situation, just assisted in the kidnapping of Ram and Ram and poisoned Neptune later. Finally, one who was not under any orders or brainwashing, Blanc, the only of the 4 main CPUs to commit a war crime. So yeah, I guess that's kind of special. Moving on to the 2 category, we have Anani Death. So his main spotlight was in episode 6 with the whole, you know, pictures of noir thing. However, he also was involved in the kidnapping of Pishi. However, he was under orders for this one, so we're putting him at the beginning of the 2 category. Now, the person that was not under any influence whatsoever, but quite surprisingly only actually committed 2 war crimes, was Plutia, particularly as Irisheart, which both hers are essentially torture, just on a different target. First being R4 and the second being Linda. Yes, I should also mention in episode 10, she almost straight up rapes Linda, but ended up not doing it, you know, because Linda told her where the secret base was, so that's that. So we only have 2 characters left, so I'm just gonna jump to them. So first of all, with 6 war crimes, we have R4. Now, she first was the mastermind behind Ramen Ram's kidnapping. Next up, she captured the CPUs and sentenced them to death without fair trial. Then she ordered Pirachu to, take the pictures, which is sexual abuse. Episode 4, she tortures them. I guess it goes into 5 as well. And finally, episode 7, she uses chemical weapons on IF and Compa, and then tortures IF. And now, finally, Ray writes. Here we go. In episode 8, she kidnaps and brainwashes Pishi. In episode 9, she experiments on Pishi, or at least helps. In episode 11, she breaks out of prison and, probably murders a bunch of guards and the sort. And also commits 2 acts of terrorism. Episode 12, she fires on civilians, uses illegal weapons, and finally, another act of terrorism. Now, we add everything together, and that leaves us with 8 war crimes over 3 fucking episodes. Let's go! Oh yeah, and if you want to figure out, exactly what everyone's sentence would be, just take their number of war crimes and, that many life sentences. The only exception is Ray Wright's, because I'd say at least 2 out of her 3 acts of terrorism definitely resulted in plenty of casualties, meaning most of the time that would qualify it for death. So, yeah, 1 or 2 for Ray instead of a life sentence. It's 1 or 2 death sentences to go along with everything else. But obviously it varies in international courts, so it might not even be a life sentence for some of the minor stuff, like the torture of one person or brainwashing or whatever. I don't know. Can't really decide. There's no certain way. But that's really it for this video. This was incredibly stupid, but funny. And if there's any other anime that has plenty of war crimes and seems way too lighthearted to have them, but in reality it does, I guess just let me know. Make sure it's a good one, though. It'll actually work, because I'm not going to actually make it a video if there's not enough war crimes. If there's only a couple, then I won't. So yeah, that's really it. I'm going to end this like how I did the last one. Fuck off.